organizing a CBC, of which a lot of people in this room participated in my circle. So thank you for that. We had 132 species between Little St. Simons, the Altamaha, Cannons Point, and a portion of Sea Island. I'll also start by saying if at any point you're getting bored, feel free to, shout at me, throw something at me. If you feel yourself fading, go ahead and grab one of those cookies and get a little bit of a sugar rush. I always like to start by saying I'm from South Florida, so not too far away, about 5 hours away from here actually. And growing up, I really never heard anything about the Georgia coast. And so I thought, must not be that great because nobody's talking about it. And then when I came to Little St. Simons for my interview for this position, I was absolutely blown away, not only by how protected and preserved it was, but by how absolutely beautiful it was. So I'd like to zoom out a little bit first. Little St. Simons, we talk a lot about it being an ecologically intact island. So what does that really mean? For us, that means very little human disturbance on the island, conservation easement, but it also means participation in a much bigger picture. And so I really like to talk about the Altamaha River. I'm sure since all of you are probably local, you're familiar with the Altamaha. It's the third largest undammed river on the eastern seaboard. It is pumping a ton of fresh water into this area. It's also bringing a lot of sediment down through this area. And over time, the Nature Conservancy has worked really hard to add all these different pieces of this puzzle, this really beautiful mosaic that's through a bunch of different project partners. And so if you were to travel 52 miles up the Altamaha, on either side of you, that land is protected. And that's really a testament to what a collaborative effort we make on the Georgia coast to protecting the things that are important to us. And that really feeds back into Little St. Simons Island, which is at the base of the Altamaha. So going back a little bit in time here, I'm going to give an extremely brief overview of the island's human history, so you do get that foundational understanding of what we're like in comparison to maybe some of the other islands you've visited. From about 500 to 1500 AD, we had seasonal use of the island by Native Americans, primarily the Wali, that were coming during the autumn to harvest oysters, raise fish, etc. And we know this because we have shell middens on the northwest part of our island. So Native American garbage piles from when they were harvesting and eating, and then going back to the mainland or some of these larger islands. In the 1500s, when the Spanish came to the coast, that's when we really saw a precipitous drop-off of Native American use of the island. Private ownership of the island began in about 1736. And in 1774, a man by the name of Major Pierce Butler, who some of you may be familiar with, he started amassing different plantations all throughout Georgia, including the Georgia coast. He bought Hampton's Point, and over several years bought portions of Little St. Simons as well. By 1811, we had 17 slaves living on the island who were responsible for harvesting crops. The Butler family established an experimental plantation on the northwest portion of our island where they attempted to grow Sea Island cotton. Didn't work out very well, and in 1824, there was a hurricane that came through and completely wiped out the settlement established on that northwestern part of the island, and the island was largely abandoned. In 1839, Fanny Kemble, who was married to Major Pierce Butler's grandson, also named Pierce Butler, came to visit the Georgia coast and her husband's cotton plantation at Hampton Point. She came over for a day trip to Little St. Simons in about mid-April, and in her journals, she gives us this really beautiful account of the natural beauty of Little St. Simons. Fast forwarding about 20 or so years later, we have somebody from the Eagle Pencil Company looking out at our island across the water and thinking it's a great place to buy to make some pencils because we have eastern red cedars on the island, and that's what pencils are made of. Well, when they did actually buy the island and set foot on it, they found out that the trees weren't really great for pencils because they were gnarled and warped from sea salt, but the owner of the pencil company, Philip Barrelsheimer, was so enamored with the island that he decided to keep it as a private retreat for his family and for the company. Over the years, they established a hunting lodge on the island and brought in different non-native species like European fallow deer, and would bring people in to hunt and enjoy. And in the late 70s, 1970s, is when the lodge as we know it more so today began, in that we established a naturalist program, and the lodge started to be geared towards people who love nature. In the 80s, Hank and Wendy Paulson came to visit the island for the first time. They were visiting Grayfield on Cumberland and heard about Little St. Simons, wanted to check it out, completely fell in love with it, and by 2007, they became the owners of Little St. Simons and really got it to be what it is today. They established Little St. Simons, the lodge, as an eco lodge. They hired an ecological manager who is still the ecological manager today, my boss, Scott Coleman. They established an ecological advisory council who we run all of our management and research decisions through, and really enacted this conservation vision, which is the stance that we take on everything today. And the biggest thing that came out of their ownership is that our island is in a conservation easement with the Nature Conservancy. So it is protected in perpetuity. It will never be developed beyond what's already there right now, which is a guest lodge with some guest cottages and some staff housing. So I work for the Center for Coastal Conservation, which again came out of that ecological vision of the Paulsons. We have an ecological manager, the ecological coordinator, myself, and a land steward, and we operate under land and wildlife stewardship, research and management, regional leadership, and education and outreach. So this very colorful map is a map of our ecological communities on the island, of which there are 10. We really focus our efforts in those that are rare and at risk. Typically that means our freshwater wetlands, which are these light blue pieces here and here, our beach complex, which obviously is this whole coastal side, and our maritime grasslands, which is this color right here. And so a lot of times I get asked, how do we choose what we want to do research with? We have this huge suite of ecological communities and so many different plant and animal species within those communities. How do you prioritize what you want to work with? And so typically we're looking again at those rare and at-risk species that are found in those rare ecosystems. And the way that we do that kind of falls into two buckets. We do some in-house monitoring ourselves and some partnership research, which may look like work with the Georgia DNR, but typically looks like a graduate student doing their master's or PhD work with us. And the way that we go about doing this is we want as low impact as possible. We want to disturb the ecosystem, that plant, that species, as little as possible. And we do this, every research project we have on the island has to feed back into our management plan. We want to be better stewards of the land. So how can we take what we're learning and apply it to our management decisions? So I'll start with talking about some of my favorite areas on the beach. I started as our bird technician on the island in March. So every day I was out biking about 11 miles a day, monitoring these guys, which are American oyster catchers. I monitored every single pair, every single nest, egg, and subsequent chick. When the chicks hit around 30 days, we went out and caught them and banded them, which looked like us running out on the beach with fishing nets, looking like dog catchers trying to catch a stray dog. But we were successful in banding all 3 chicks that we had that year. So American oyster catchers are an at-risk species in that they're subjected to, like all shorebirds, loss of habitat due to human encroachment, climate change, sea level rise. And so these birds, around 2001, a bunch of managers along the eastern coast got together and decided that we really needed to look at this species a bit closer. This population was at about 11,000 then. It's been increasing ever since, and that's really due to a collaborative effort between multiple states across the eastern coast and the Gulf as well. In some years, we've been responsible for producing 50% of chicks in the state of Georgia. One of my other favorite areas on the island is Norm's Pond. It's considered an altered or man-made freshwater wetland. And usually when you hear the term altered or man-made, you think of something really degraded and of low quality. And Norm's was that for a long time. It was actually a borrow pit. It was dug out to create the roads on the island. It was then an artesianal well was put in. It was stocked with fish, and it was used as a fishing hole for many years. And over time, they noticed that birds were nesting along this back edge, but they weren't successful because raccoons were able to get to those nests and eat the eggs. So when the Paulsons took over the island, what we did is we went back into Norm's and created these islands where raccoons were still able to swim out, but we now had alligators living in Norm's. So the raccoons began to think twice about going out there. And since then, it's absolutely exploded with species. We have hundreds of birds that nest in here yearly. Our rookery will get underway mid-February and is really in full swing around May to June. We're one of 4 sites in Georgia where roseate spoonbills nest. We had lots of wood storks successfully fledged this year. I believe I had about 65 or so. So a really great example of how we've taken something that was not meant for this purpose at all and really flipped the script and turned it into something really wonderful. Another great example of that on the island is Myrtle Pond. Myrtle Pond was created in the 1930s. It's a 90-acre impoundment that was used for duck hunting. We use these structures, which are called rice gates, a super old technology where we're able to manually lower and raise the water level of the pond. And these are tidal gates. So as the tide comes in, depending on how open or closed I have that gate, it allows water in and out. The tide will push the gate open and it will push it closed when it comes back out. And so we no longer obviously have duck hunting on the island, but we still utilize this technology depending on what species are using the pond. Right now, like Ben was saying, we have lots of ducks on the island. So we have the water level up higher than typical because the ducks will forage on about 1.5 feet of water or so. And as they leave to go move on to their next place, I'll start to lower the water level because we'll have birds like black-necked stilts coming in that will use the pond to nest in through July. And we'll keep that water level at about 0.5 foot because they'll go out on our mud flats in the pond and teach their young to forage. I'll then raise the water level up because our American alligators are using the pond to nest in, and they'll use these little pockets of Spartina to make their nests. And again, that helps keep the raccoons out as well. And so the cycle repeats itself throughout the year, but just another great example of us taking something that was used for one specific purpose and multi-purposing it along the way. This is another really special area on the island. Our naturally formed freshwater wetlands. There are about 46 acres of naturally formed freshwater wetlands on the island. These are in these intertidal dune swales. So when the tide naturally came up to the island many years ago and it formed these divots in the land, those areas actually fill up with rainwater. And so there are no springs on the island. This is solely rainwater fed, and it supports species like these Hibiscus grandiflorus, which are a truly spectacular sight if you've never seen them. This video here is taken on an 8-foot ladder. That's me standing at the top. The flowers are about 10 feet tall with blooms as big as my face. You truly feel like a little fairy in a garden when you walk out in there. And this is also where we have species like amphibians, all of our frog species, leopard frogs, green tree frogs, squirrel tree frogs, where they're all breeding. And these are areas that are super sensitive and really at risk of sea level rise and saltwater intrusion. If any of you have been to St. Catherine's Island, they used to have a lot of sweeping areas of this that they've largely lost due to seawater intrusion. And so we do a lot of monitoring in this area, checking on the salinity, checking on what species are still utilizing it. We go out and check on these blooms every year. We also do secretive marsh bird surveys in these areas. And we do this because not only do we want to see what's using these areas, but we also want to make sure that they're being preserved properly. So these are areas that we're thinking towards the future and thinking about how can we protect them, what can we do in order to keep these as freshwater wetlands. And that may look like us eventually doing some larger scale restoration projects. On the island in the 30s, the Civilian Conservation Corps did some mosquito ditching, which altered the hydrology of some of these areas. And so we are optioning ideas about restoring the hydrological regime to keep these as freshwater wetlands. So back to the beach, we on the Georgia coast, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, have nesting sea turtles. This past year on the beach, we had 165 loggerhead sea turtle nests. And as I'm sure you all know, on the Georgia coast, we're a little bit different than other states like Florida, where they have over 100,000 nests a year. We don't have quite that many, but we do something really special in that we participate in a project with the University of Georgia where we will go out and find every single nest, take one egg from that nest, empty out its contents, and keep the shell. From that shell, they're able to get maternal DNA. So we're able to see these lineages over time of grandmothers, mothers, daughters of sea turtles. And this past year, they actually saw that taking a whole egg, the yolk will have male DNA as well. So we're potentially going to be able to have some male lineages in there as well. So my sea turtle technician on Little St. Simons, we don't allow vehicles on our beach. So she was out biking 18 miles a day. It's a really great job if you're looking to get in shape. And she would go out and find each and every nest every day. So shifting into some of our partnership research, a lot of our partnership research these days looks like graduate students. All 3 graduate students we have on the island do go to UGA. That is not a bias. It's just worked out that way. But our one graduate student that's working with painted buntings on the island, her name is Diane. She just finished her master's and is now starting her PhD, where her study site will still be Little St. Simons. But what she was doing is she was looking at this species, which is in decline, like many others due to habitat loss. Painted buntings are also captured for the exotic pet trade. And so what she was doing is looking at this really fine scale spatial data with these birds. We have painted buntings that nest on the island in the summer. And so how did she do this? What she would do is she would go out, she would catch the birds using mist nets, and she would put these little tags on them. These tags are radio tags that communicate with a tower. Each tag has its own individual code, like a radio station. But these tags are extra special because they're MODIS tags. Is anyone familiar with MODIS? Great. So MODIS is really special. It's a newer technology. I had never heard of it until I came to Little St. Simons, and I've done a lot of work with radio telemetry. And so essentially, these tags communicate with a tower. And if the bird flies within a certain distance of the tower, it gives them a data point to where you're able to get these really awesome images like this, where each of these dots is an individual bird. So we're seeing where the bird is moving within this area over time. And where these birds are nesting is in our maritime grasslands. And the grasslands are a really imperiled area. We've had a lot of loss of them along the coast in general. And so we really work to preserve our grasslands. We're a little special in that we've never really had any disturbance in the grasslands, and because our beach is accreting, growing 2 to 3 feet each year because of the Altamaha depositing sediment on our island, we keep gaining space for these grasslands to keep establishing. So we're a really great study site in what a maritime grasslands is supposed to look like. And so with these tags, Diane was able to see where these birds are going in the grasslands throughout their time on the island through their breeding cycle. And what she found was incredibly fascinating. The different areas that the birds were going varied between sex, it varied between age, and what they were eating in that time varied between sex and age as well. And so she also, when she would catch these birds, she would collect a fecal sample that was sent to a lab, and they were getting insect data, so what kinds of insects these birds were eating, what kinds of seeds they were eating, and it was a huge suite of species. And so really underscoring the importance not just to keep this a grasslands, but to keep this a diversified grasslands for birds like these, for other grasslands birds that use our island as well. So another student we have working on the island is studying our muley grass. Muley grass is one of the dominant species in our maritime grasslands. If any of y'all have been on Jekyll, you know that Jekyll is doing a restoration project there. They're turning one of their golf courses into a wildlife corridor, and they're planting muley grass to do that. And Sarah is working to understand how different fire regimes, soil content, plant density, muley grass density in terms of a plug of muley next to another plug of muley or different species affects its growth. And that's still very much ongoing, but one really fascinating thing that she's found is that insects really rely on muley grass, and not in the way that I would have thought, where that they were maybe eating the muley grass, but really they're using muley grass as a cover. So insects will use the muley as a shelter, and the bigger the piece of muley, the more insect diversity there is. There are also insects that feed on fungus, and there's specific kinds of fungus that grow on the muley. And so there's this really great dynamic between the muley, insects, and then of course that ties back into our painted buntings. A lot of the insects that they're eating are living on the muley. So really underscoring this dynamic of how all of these species are dependent on one another. And of course, this is not only important for painted buntings, or these are all tree swallows that come through in the fall, but also species like the diamondback rattlesnake and its prey, the hispid cottonrat. That's where we're finding all of these animals. So the grasslands on the island are incredibly critical for a whole suite of species that are truly only found in those areas. One of my other favorite things on the island that's near and dear to my heart, we had a graduate student several years ago now, before our time, or before my time, I should say, that worked with northern yellow bats on the island. They took Little St. Simons, which was never logged for shipbuilding, and compared it to Sapelo, which was. And you, of course, could say, we know these bats are utilizing the maritime forest. They found actually that they were roosting in the Spanish moss. And of course, you could say, well, there's more of these really old live oak trees in our forest compared to Sapelo. There will be more northern yellow bats on our island for that reason. But like with anything with science, you have to prove it. And so they did. And it really underscored the importance of keeping our maritime forests as they are for different species like this that are so specialized in what they use for roosting habitat. And while we no longer have a yellow bat project ongoing on the island, we do still work with the Georgia DNR. They'll come out a couple times a year to mist net bats, which looks like them putting these nets out over some open water and catching bats at night. We had them out a couple months ago, and they were looking for hoary bats in relation to offshore wind. Didn't find any hoary bats, but did get a lot more yellow bats, which was really exciting. They'll still take morphological measurements, tag the bats as well. So a really important site for bats too. So on the island, all of the work that I do could not be done without our volunteers. I have about 30 to 35 people that come out regularly to assist with what we do. We have volunteers that come out to help with sea turtle nesting, to help with seabird and shorebird surveys, our whimbrel count. I really could not do what I do without them. we have lots and lots of things going on at any given time. And so these people, not only do they help, but they're people where I can send them out on their own and know that they'll be doing a great job, which is so incredible and so special to me. Who in here is a student? Okay, so on the island, we do have some internship and technician position opportunities. Each year we hire a bird technician, which, like I said, is what I started off doing. I monitored our wading bird rookery, our nesting shorebirds, and did secretive marsh bird counts. We also hire a land steward technician who helps with prescribed burning, who helps with some of our cool weather projects like our big builds. This is a boardwalk that our land steward technician last year helped build. And we also hire a sea turtle technician who does all of our sea turtle monitoring. These positions run at a time that are usually during school, so this is more so geared towards recent graduates or people who are about to graduate. Our sea turtle technician this past year, Sammy, started right after she graduated. However, we do look for interns, people who are really passionate about what we do on the island during the summer months. So if that's something anybody is ever interested, please send them my way. I'm happy to have you out. We're also involved in a lot of different other organizations, not only you guys, but organizations like the St. Simons Land Trust. Obviously, I discussed that the Nature Conservancy we have an easement with, so we work very, very closely with them. The American Oyster Catcher Working Group, which is who we report in our oyster catcher numbers and our banding data. Stewards of the Georgia Coast is a great organization, and then 100 Miles, which is an environmental advocacy group here on the Georgia coast, and who does a lot of really excellent work. We'll be having their student organization out to the island next month. And we really, again, I would really love to underscore the fact that being from Florida, I've really never seen the kind of collaboration that I do here on the Georgia coast. It makes the Georgia coast just incredibly special. Not only do we work together between our island and the mainland here on St. Simons, but also throughout all the other islands on the coast. That's it. Thank you. Questions?